All right, let's do it. All right, this is the City Council work session for April 19th, 2021. The meeting is now called to order. A roll call, please, Sue.
Councillor McBride,
Here.
Councillor Cofield.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Yarnell Holloman.
Here.
Councillor Martinez Plancarte.
Present.
Mayor Rogers.
Present.
Councillor Bacon.
Here.
Councillor Finley.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, all present.
Okay, thank you all. All right, the review of the council agenda and meeting. Any comments, folks? All right, one we do have, we're hoping to actually hold the executive session before the end of the work session, business session, strike that, before the end of the business session, and then come back for the urban renewal meeting immediately following at 8:30. We should be able to do it relatively easy. The business session is pretty light with one report, and then and Dan's city manager's report. So if that's okay with you all. All right. Any business items, folks?
I have one. I have 14 COVID vaccine doses at Providence Newberg Hospital right now, and I'm having a panic attack. So if anyone knows anyone that needs a COVID vaccine dose, please text me. They expire in 30 minutes.
Okay. All right. Everybody, if you got anybody out there, let's get the word out. Anybody listening, get the word out too. So there we are. All right, let's move on to presentations. This is systems development charges. And I believe City Engineer Hoffman will lead us through this exercise.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. So yeah, we're here tonight to talk about systems development charges, basically to give an overview about what they are, how they're used, and then get some direction from the council towards the end about where we want to go. We know we've heard a lot of concerns and comments, but looking to council to provide some direction about where we take it from here. Next slide, please. So what are system development charges? System development charges are one-time fees that are charged on new development, certain types of redevelopment, which would be like an addition or those types of things, or change in use. That change in use is where you had a house and then you wanted to put a retail space in that house, and there's a difference there in the amount of impact that has on the system. ORS's statutes govern the SDCs. So all of anything that we adopt has to comply with those statutes. Next slide. So types of SDCs, there's water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation, and parks. The city has control over the first four. CPRD controls the parks SDC. We have no authority to change that, modify it, or anything along those lines. We only have control over the first four. So next slide, please. So why assess SDCs and what are they used for? So they help pay for existing and planned infrastructure to serve development. It's one method of financing infrastructure. It's not the only one, and we can talk about other options later on. Newberg first adopted SDC ordinances in 1991. So this is not a new thing. We've been doing it for 30 years. They have changed over the last 20 years. One thing I know we hear a lot about is downtown development didn't have to pay at one point, and that was true. The council had waived all SDC fees or all transportation SDC fees for development in the downtown area. When the transportation SDC methodology was adopted 2 years ago, we removed that waiver because of the amount of projects that were going to be located in the downtown, including the road diet and those types of things. So one thing to note is only the council has the authority to waive, forgive, lower SDCs, except for in 3 specific instances. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So I know that there's a lot of people who call me in particular and City Manager Weinheimer and others and ask, well, can't you waive them? Can't you lower them? And we don't have, the code is not written to provide us with that authority in order to do that. So a couple other things to note, SDCs can only be used on projects that increase capacity. We can't use them for maintenance projects. We can't use them for, we've got breaks in the pipes and we need to replace them, those types of things. So it's strictly for adding additional capacity to provide for growth. Another question that's come up is all of our SDC revenues go into one pot: water, wastewater, transportation, stormwater, and they're used for projects all over the city. We don't designate when a development in one area of town makes a SDC payment. It's not just for projects in that area of town. We use that for projects all over town. So next slide, please. Some current projects that are being funded by the SDCs, Northeast Chehalem Water and Wastewater Extension. We're extending those through Highway 240 over the Chehalem Creek and then up into Northeast Chehalem Drive. The East Crestview Drive project that's underway currently from the Springbrook Roundabout to the city limit line. Redundant water supply. We'll be talking more. We've been talking about redundant water supply. We'll continue to talk about that. So that's one project that's being funded by SDCs. Bell West Pump Station, which is on the north end of town, that allows for future growth on those higher elevations. And then our Influent infiltration projects. This is actually one where, although we're fixing existing pipes in most cases, we're providing additional capacity because we are taking care of inflow that is taking up capacity in those pipes. So we are actually able to use it for 50% of the projects. Next slide, please. So how are they calculated? It starts with a project list. The statutes call capital improvement plan, a public facilities plan, master plan. We normally start with a master plan. And each system is calculated in a different manner, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then the methodology report that is adopted by the council sets that calculation method. Next slide, please. So they're comprised of 3 different fees. There's a reimbursement fee. So this is where we built the pipe, already built the pipe bigger than it needed to be. And so people will reimburse essentially the city for the cost of those existing facilities. Improvement fee is for the projects that are on that adopted list that we still need to build or need to be constructed. And then compliance costs, that's kind of the overhead master planning and the methodology development cost. That's normally pretty minor in this grand scheme of things. Next slide, please. So how can SDCs be lowered? The authority to make these reductions or waivers, they're set in the municipal code, and these are the 3 ways that staff has to lower SDCs. Previous use. So this is where an applicant will pay the difference in the fee between the old use and the new use. So like the one I was just speaking about, it's been a house and they've decided that they're going to change it to a restaurant. They would get the difference, they would get the SDC amount for the house, and that would offset the amount that would be needed for the restaurant. SDCs can be waived for 2 low or moderate income single-family residential projects for water and wastewater per year. And then construction of a qualified improvement. And this is not necessarily lowering the SDCs, but this is providing a credit. So what happens is they go and they build, they have to build the sewer pipe at 18 inches, say, and they only need 8 inches. they can get the difference between the cost of the difference between the 8 and the 18 inches. And then that cost is offset. We call it credits. They provided credits. So then as they come in for each of the buildings, and their SDCs would then get credited back based on the amount of that qualified improvement that is constructed. And there's specific requirements for that qualified improvement. It has to be in the master plan, that project. It has to be required as a condition of approval for the development. And it has to be in excess of what is required for that development. So if that required development needed 12 inches, they don't get the 12 inches, they get the difference between the 12 and the 18, assuming the 18 is in the master plan. So another couple of things in January, the council did change the code to allow for single family residences to pay later on in the process, to pay at the time of installation inspection instead of at the time of building permit issuance. It gives a little bit more time for the development to come up with those costs. Another thing to note is that they can be what's called Bancroft bonded. Basically, they're financing the payment of those SDCs through the city. And then they have 10 years to pay them off. And again, there's code language that sets what the interest rate will be. And that's all done through the finance department. Next slide, please. So the water, wastewater, stormwater system development charges. The water SDC is based on meter size. You install a 3/4 inch meter, there's a cost associated with that. We also have 2 different SDCs for water. We have a potable and a non-potable SDC. So if someone was to hook up to the non-potable system, they would pay an SDC, and that SDC would go towards construction of additional capacity in that non-potable system. Excuse me. The wastewater SDC is based on the number of proposed fixture units, which is different than fixtures. This number is derived from the building code, and then most single family homes are 18 fixture units. And the stormwater SDC is based on the amount of new impervious surface created. So again, if it's an existing completely paved, there's no SDC that would be paid. The base rate is at 2877 square feet. That's what we call an equivalent dwelling unit. The amount of impervious surface is divided by 2877, and then that number is then multiplied by the rate. Next slide, please. So the transportation system development charge, I think this is the one that we hear the most about here at the city. And it's based on the number of peak hour person trips. So includes pedestrians. It's not just vehicles, it's pedestrians that are coming to and from the facility also. The trip rate is based on the type of land use. And the city utilizes the ITE manual to determine the trip rate for each development proposed. A couple other things to note, the ITE manual uses national averages. So these are numbers that are gathered, throughout the country. They've actually even gone into more detail lately on suburban versus urban environments and those types of things, because the numbers are different for that. And then we do also have an adjustment that we use for diverted or pass-by trips. So those would be trips, say you're leaving the office in the afternoon and you're going to stop at the grocery store, and then you're going to stop at the gym, and you're going to make all these stops on the way home. Those are considered diverted and or pass-by trips. And there's a reduction that gets done for the rate for those. And then if there isn't anything in the ITE manual that really matches up with what that use is, or the developer says, this just really doesn't match up with what we're going to do, they can submit a traffic study or more information that estimates the number of trips that the development will generate, and then we'll use that number to calculate the transportation SDC. So there is a way for people to say, you know, those don't really match what we're going to do in our location, and here's what how we're going to do that. Next slide, please. So this is just one piece. There's at least 5 other pieces of the different land use types. So these are pretty generic. Again, commercial airport, we have a golf course, high schools, different high school or different schools have different levels of the number of trips. And these are all in the PM peak hour. So we don't use all day trips, it's just the trips in the PM peak hour. So next slide, please. So the city of Newberg system development charges. The single family home is one in the first column and does not include the parks SDC, but I did put that number down at the bottom for a single family home. These are based on the rates that were just adopted by the council April 1st of 2021. The single family home SDCs is a little over $21,000. For the health and fitness club, it's $304,000, with a majority of that being the transportation. And then manufacturing is at $73,065. So that's where the city's system development charges sit at this point in time. Next slide, please. So comparison with other jurisdictions, we hear a lot about, you know, how do we compare those types of things? Here's just, you know, 4 others other than us. One thing to note for single family homes, the latest Home Builders Association charts show that we're in the middle for single family residents. There are, what's the numbers? There were 37 on their list, and we're at 20th. So we're pretty much right in the middle there. Quality restaurant, you'll see that we're in the middle there, or lower end. And then the health club, we're near the top on the health club one. So things to keep in mind there. Also, I know that it comes up about McMinnville a lot. A couple things to note with McMinnville's SDCs is that they don't assess a water SDC, because their water comes through McMinnville Water and Light, and they get their additional capacity money through other methods. They do logging and those types of things throughout the year. And then also they've kept their SDC for transportation lower, because a lot of their projects, they actually went out for bond measures, which requires that everybody pays on those costs of those improvements. You know, all of the taxpayers pay on those, instead of the development paying for that. So that kind of shows you where that is at. So next slide, please. This kind of shows, again, what we just spoke about. I did see Philip's question, and the numbers that I have on our slide for us does not include the SDCs, but including the parks SDCs, we are still in the middle. Again, based on this chart that the Home Builders Association puts out. So next slide is just the second half of that. And in the packet, I did have this attached separately, so it's a little bit bigger to see it, because I know on the screen, I know I can't read that. So next slide, please. Any questions at this point?
Folks, I can't see all your hands, so speak up if you have questions, or raise your hands. All right, there's a hand. Bryce, go ahead.
Yeah, Connor, thank you for the presentation. There's lots of good stuff here. And I know there's lots of feelings and energy around SDCs. I'm curious, so right now, given the projects, and I know that we've had lots of presentations on the multiple projects that are going on, how can you help give us a better understanding of where SDC monies are in terms of the ability to meet the financial needs of these projects? Does that make sense? Like currently, knowing new projects are always going to emerge, things are going to have to be addressed to build capacity. That makes sense to me. But I'm trying to get a sense of, based off of where we're at, how does that connect with the projects that we have currently on the docket?
Are you thinking of like how many we wouldn't be able to do if we didn't have SDCs?
Yeah, I think that's probably the question behind the question, right? Is if
Mhm.
we were to consider lowering SDCs,
Mhm.
so it's either incentivize or remove barriers for development, what would be the potential adverse effects on our own ability to meet the increasing needs that we're sensing in the city?
And that's going to come next after I get these other questions. So I've got a list of options that the council can look at. And if that's one of the things you want us to look at, I can come back with that specific number and which projects, because what happens is each project in most cases has both SDCs and rates attached to it. And so if the SDCs were to decrease or to go away, we would have to maneuver all of the projects around, and either you have one of two options. And again, I can get into more detail about this, is either we just don't new projects, which we can look at which projects would likely go away, or the ratepayers pick up more of the cost of those projects too. So that could be the other way. And that's, again, something the council can help us decide. And I can certainly bring, again, based on the conversation tonight, what the council wants us to look at option wise, I can bring that information back.
I have a follow-on, Rick, to that
Okay.
question.
Sorry, Denise, please.
Okay. So if you look at Bryce's question, then you also would have to answer, how many people do we believe don't come here because of it? We know, like, the gym left, we know, so we know things aren't staying too. So the project still might not get done if people don't come. Correct?
Certainly possible, yeah. If development was to stop, those development charges would not occur. You're correct.
Okay, Mike.
So I know that the money goes into separate different pots that you talked about. I mean, categories. Does any of it go into general fund, or is it just strictly used for those different categories?
It is not allowed to be used for general fund. It can just strictly be used for project capacity improving projects.
Okay. Can I have a follow-up to that, please?
Go for it.
So, this is something I've thought about for a long time, but I don't really know. So I'm looking forward to some of your options. Obviously, we can't just eliminate this in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know if, because of where we're uniquely located, I don't think building this stuff is ever going to stop. But it does add to the question of, how do we have affordable housing when you've got, $40,000 in fees before you ever turn a shovel? And are we going to ever look at perhaps what the additional costs are for, like, permits? I don't know what the cost is for permits and those types of things. Is that going to come along sometime for us to talk about?
Well, permit fees are set, again, the council adopts those in April. So that there is an entire list of them. I can work with Doug and we can come back with what a typical single family residential permit fee costs. we'll have to make some assumptions, which we always do when we're calculating these fees, but we could certainly bring that back.
Okay.
All right, other questions, folks? All right, not seeing any at the moment. Karen, I guess a couple things. First off, the IT, when you use those numbers, is there, well, first, let me back up. First off, although we normally don't take comments during work session, we did receive public comments from Philip Higgins and from the Chamber of Commerce. They were included in your packets. So anyway, and they're on the website if people would like to see those. So my question is, when we do the IT and the trip generation, I know there was quite a bit of sticker shock with the gym and the $200,000. Is there a consideration on square footage of there is? Okay, thank you. I'd assume there have to be. The other thing is, well, first, there's a typo on the RCA, I think, for under Health Fitness Club. The number didn't translate from what you had in the presentation. So just for the record. And then finally, I guess the other question is how we check that we're doing this correctly. I mean, how we know that we're covering what we need to cover and not charging too much. So here's an example. So 300 new units of housing are coming online. Each of them is $21,000 in SDC fees assumed, not including the parks. So that, I think, is $6 million if math serves, okay? So the question is that $6 million adequate to cover the impact of the number of people moving into those units? And I think we've got that number. So it's like 2.65 persons per unit. So if it's 800 people, does 6 million cover the impact of 800 people or an increase of 3 to 4% in the population? I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at. Is there another way to check it aside from looking at the master plan list of projects?
So the way the methodology, I can talk with different people that write different methodologies. Deb Glardy being one of them, FCS Group being another. But most of them, they truly start with the cost of the projects, and then, you calculate from there. Or also they add in the existing, infrastructure that is constructed, because there is a certain amount that was built to accommodate that additional development. Has anybody ever turned around and looked at what each trip costs the system? If you're talking transportation, I don't know of a jurisdiction that has ever done it that way. We did look at that a little bit when we went through the TEF process and assessed, the rates and how many trips are generated on between the residential versus the commercial and those types of things. And that was part of the conversation that we had when we set those rates about who should be paying what percentage of the fee for that piece of the puzzle. So that might be an opportunity, if the council wanted us to explore other methodology ways to do it. And like I said, I would have to ask others that go into or calculate for other jurisdictions to see if anybody has ever tried to do that and whether it passes through the statute.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily asking for, a whole new methodology, because the methodology makes sense to me. I mean, it's a formula or a series of formulas that make some sense. But again, even if there was just a way to check on an isolated project, and I think we mentioned this, the council mentioned this at the last council meeting about Crestview Crossing, for instance, just to say, is the 6 million that it will generate in SDCs to the city, is it adequate for the impact of that development as an isolated item? Now, I don't mean to call out Crestview Crossing. It just happens to be one that's in process now. So anyway, that's more what I was getting at, just to make sure that 21,000 is a good number given what we have. The other way to look at it, I guess. But anyway, Any other questions, folks? Okay. I
Wait,
don't see
sorry,
any more.
I have one more
Go
question.
ahead,
Right?
Bryce.
And I don't know, Carl, this is a question for you or Rick or whomever. But it sounds like SDCs, right? There's a relationship between the city and CPRD. And so part of me wonders, have there been conversations? If so, how or what would conversations look like? So there's a concerted effort to address what we may sense is a problem, right? So because part of me is sitting here thinking, okay, we may decide to lower them XYZ sort of percentage, but if CPRD is then like, oh, we're going to increase this percentage, now the businesses or folks that are trying to develop are in the same exact spot. And so I'm just curious of what the history of those conversations have looked like and what what would be required to move forward.
I mean, I can relay my experience when, and I don't know. I mean, I think Doug or Karn would know better. They were here during the time, but I think well, not to speak ill of our friends at Parks and Rec, but they know too that they sprung it on people. It was all of a sudden a large increase at one time to catch up, was my understanding. And I don't know that there was a lot of collaboration per se. But the point is well taken, and there probably should be, at least in my opinion. But like I say, Doug or Karn would know better in the history.
What I will say is yeah, we were not involved in that, in those discussions with CPRD and their board when they set those rates.
Stephanie.
Yeah, it's kind of a follow-up to that, because I'd like to know if there's any way to sort of know what it would look like if what the long-term impact is, because I think we've seen in other areas where we lower our revenue and then a few years down the road, we have to increase our revenue exponentially to catch up. And so I kind of want some more information on what that means in terms of a catch-up game, and when that would be predicted. Is that 5 years from now? Is it 10 years? Or is it 35 years from now that we would be seeing a place where we would need to play catch-up if there was a reduction in these? And I know that's a really long question that probably can't get answered tonight, but sort of a way to think about that so that we're not kicking this down the road for another council in 5, 10, 20 years to have to deal with how we've impacted the growth of our city.
Denise.
So I just saw Philip Higgins' question, and that's a good one. Maybe also kind of analyzing, are we bringing in, I'm comfortable with the house, I'm comfortable with the smaller bit, but when small businesses can't move here and we're only getting franchise, and we hear people, they don't want franchise. If I can't afford to open a restaurant, if I have to put up $150,000 just in fees, so I'd like kind of an assessment of if we're getting bigger restaurants only, or how are small businesses faring these fees?
And I think as a comment to that as well, and sort of following on, I think in some ways you can probably help generate what you want to happen based on the fees. Now, and if we say that it's 200,000 on a tough fee or on a transportation fee for a gym, someone could say Newberg doesn't want private gyms, right? And so that kind of thing, I think, does factor in. And I understand that you need some basis, but I think at some point there has to be a point where we say, $200,000 to present to a would-be business owner to transfer his business from one location to another in Newberg that's not going to work, right? So, all right. Anyone else? Other comments? All right, I think we're ready to move up. Bryce, go
Sorry,
ahead.
quick question. I know we have a really impacted agenda, so not to belabor it. There's an interesting dynamic where, Karin, you had mentioned in your presentation, right, that for development of like low income or affordable housing, that there are options, right, as it pertains to SDCs. So to me, that's a good move, right, and speaks to providing options for things that we particularly value. So part of me wonders what other options might be available to us, right? So I know in Philip Higgins' letter, right? Oh no, it wasn't Philip. It was Mark Moison's letter had mentioned the potential childcare facility, but I know there was a lot of energy around. That sounds like something that I would be interested in providing more options to, right? As an example of things that we particularly value and want to see present. So yeah, I just wonder, like, how was that process established to say those that are trying to build affordable housing have these options, and what might it look like to apply that same process to other forms of development that we also value in the city? Does that make sense?
So,
Okay.
yes, the next slide that's up on the screen now is talking about options. So, you know, obviously the council has lots of options. You can, no change. There's, you know, that's always an option, to leave it as is. We can change the methodology wholesale. We can, you know, go back to the drawing board and start looking at it in a different way, kind of and seeing what other options there may be out there for how we do the methodology. We can lower the amount, so, or assess a lower amount. So the council has the ability to say, you know what, the SDC should be this amount, but wholesale across the board, we're only going to assess at 80% of that rate. So when you do that, obviously you reduce your project list, or you extend your timeline of your project list. So rather than doing your projects in 20 years, you're going to do them in 40, depending on what your reduction may be. One thing that has been looked at is assessing different amounts based on geography or a new area, for example. So the council has done, just incorporated, or is in the process of incorporating the riverfront area into the master plans. So that's an area that has very specific needs. It has to extend a lot of utilities because they don't exist. So what has been done in other locations is that because this is a new area, we would assess a different SDC for that location to pay for their infrastructure specifically. In most cases, that means that their rates are going to be significantly higher than if you spread the wealth basically over development all over town. But that is something that has been done and could be done if the council wanted to go there. I think this gets to what you were talking about, Bryce. We could grant other types of waivers. You know, again, as we did before, we waived the transportation SDCs in the downtown, or we're not going to assess SDCs on this type of use, if that's what we're going to do. We would need to be relatively objective about that. My assumption is that James would, this city attorney would say, we need to make sure that there's some clear criteria, because otherwise you could have somebody say, well, you gave it to them, how come you're not giving it to me? So making sure we have very clear criteria. Again, the council can set that as findings on to do that, which is, again, just what you spoke about, Bryce. And then another option is we could eliminate SDCs altogether. We could just say, you know what, we don't want to assess SDCs at all anymore. And we would just waive those. And then we would look at either funding projects with some other source or scaling back the number of projects that we do significantly, which can make an effect on development. Also, you know, again, we use the money to provide additional capacity so development can occur. If we were to stop doing all capacity related projects, that could slow down development because it would require the developer to construct all of it. so there's a, you know, a cost associated with that also. So, you know, I heard questions about cost of permit fees. We can bring those back. Checking to see if, you know, as the mayor said, kind of a gut check to see if the amount that we're assessing seems to be right for the amount of impact. When catch-up would happen if we were to do one of these options. And then as Councilor Cofield said, you know, do we want to grant other type of waivers, and what those might look like? So here's where I come back to you, ask you which one sounds kind of where you want to go, and I would bring back information about what the consequences for those different types of options would be, so that the council could make an informed decision on where they want to go and how they want to do that.
Mayor, if I can chime in real quickly, I would suggest that it might be helpful to also consider two things. One, that this is not permanent. And so, you know, just as we're sort of revisiting SDCs, we can decide to revisit them again at a certain interval. And so that change, or what we might suggest as options with certain types of clear criteria, choices that we're trying to incentivize, those can be short-lived or relatively short-lived. I think Karin would probably prefer them not to be 1 year, but you know, something in that 5 to 7 year range might be ideal for some of this. But the other thing, you know, is just thinking about you know, the master plans and some of the other activities that we have going on. Really thinking about where we can have an impact on some of those developments, and I think I would suggest, similar to how we develop those master plans, having a conversation with the community might be helpful. And that can be one of the interim steps that we do, as well as try to get some feedback. I know the chamber is interested in helping us facilitate some of those conversations with certain members of the business community, and we could look to do that as well.
You know, just a comment or two. First off, I've been in a number of conversations. I know Dan and Doug and Karin, I'm sure, have as well, is that, you know, this is one of the things that many businesses coming into town asks right out of the gate. You know, how much can you waive in terms of SDCs? And there's all sorts of always good reasons for economic development or whatever other reason. But those SDC funds still need to be backfilled in some way, right? If we're on this methodology. So that's where it gets to be a challenge in waiving them, right? And the other thing is that, you know, on this notion of the affordable housing, yes, there has been 2 houses per year of SDC water and wastewater waived. And that's 2 units, and CET may add, you know, the possibility to incentivize developers there. But those are the only one, that's the only one, as Karin said, that's a standing waiver as far as we know. So, oh, and full disclosure, I work for Habitat for Humanity in my day job, and we've benefited from those waivers a few times. Yes. So, all right, folks, what's your pleasure? Karin and Dan are asking for some sort of direction here as to what you'd like to see. Yep, Mike, it's you.
Yeah, so I would like to get a little bit more information. I guess just to be able to come up with a better idea, maybe something, what some of the other cities around us are actually doing. You know, what is their basis or their methodology? Are we all using the same methodology? Because I know there is a methodology that's you know, in place.
We can certainly bring that back. I did speak to the McMinnville city manager, and I can tell you he told me that they're using the exact same methodology that on transportation. I think the difference is how much they're collecting.
And I think I've said this before, and I'll run the risk of being redundant, but I also spoke with the mayor of McMinnville recently, and they admit that they have not been collecting enough SDCs, which is hurting them now. So,
yeah.
All right, Stephanie, then Bryce, please.
Yeah, I would definitely like to have a conversation with the community, the business community in particular, about, just sort of a candid conversation about what this means for them, especially when we talk about, if you eliminate SDCs, then that also has an impact on development. So I would definitely like to have some conversations with the community about this. And I also think my pleasure would be sort of a mix and match of these things, which I know is probably difficult, but looking at what we could do to both lower some of the amounts, add some waivers, and then what kind of projects would we be looking at to ask for bond measures, sort of a mix and match of those kinds of things, because I certainly would like to have the conversation about how we promote development, particularly small businesses and affordable housing, but how we do that in a way that doesn't impact the way we do business, more than it should. So, that's sort of where I stand on this.
I could just follow on with a quick answer. In addition to small business affordable housing, I mean, I'd also like to find ways to make sure we can attract trade sector jobs, family wage jobs, particularly in the riverfront. So there you go. And Bryce.
Yeah, you all spoke a lot on my mind. In agreement with Stephanie around being in conversation. Yeah, I think it was mentioned in public comments that needs to be fair. So I'm curious, like, what does that look like? My guess is, of course, developers love for there to be probably no SDCs, but that's not reasonable. So I would be curious what they believe would be fair and how that would match up with some of our needs. So I think that should be part of the conversation. There is a note also in the public comment around some people who have quote unquote luck of the draw and pay zeros. I'm curious as to like what that is. Like that's a bit confusing to me. I haven't heard of anything, at least of there being like a lottery system. So that would be something I think for me to learn more about. And then last, in terms of direction, yeah, Carl, you're right. I'm all about like grants and other types of waivers that are intentionally aligned with city goals and outcomes. So Rick, yeah, as you're talking about the type of things along the riverside, I'm with you. To me, again, there was a lot of energy around helping meet the need of Newberg and daycare, and I think it was called the Daycare Oasis. To me, that's something that can and should be considered for some sort of waiver. But yeah, those are my three thoughts on this.
And I think, the other thing is back to what Bryce just said, to follow on a little bit. I mean, we do have council goals, and so if we've determined that daycare is an equity question, then that can fall into that slot, right? If there's housing or anything like that, but I would argue that, family wage jobs is a question of equity too. So, see what I mean? That's where it can get pretty broad. I think at this point, all right, we're at 6:48. Anything else, folks? Other questions or comments?
Council, can I ask a quick question? Again, trying to, coalesce and bring you back information that you're looking for. Is the council mostly concerned on transportation, or are you concerned on the water, wastewater, and stormwater also? Or are we strictly, is transportation our concern at this point? Or all of that?
Mike, go ahead.
I think it needs to be all of it.
Okay.
Just kind of again, I don't want to eliminate it completely, but I think we do need to take a serious look at what can we do to somewhat lower that impact.
And I think we talked about this last meeting maybe, and trying to get an isolated view of impact of a particular development. Now, we don't have to use that development necessarily, but what would 300 houses impact the system? I would like to know that. I'd like to know what is 300 houses for 792 new residents. What is the impact? Is there a way to figure that out? Because then I'll know if $6 million is right or not. I mean, I know I mean, maybe it sounds really easy. It's probably impossible. So yeah, I know, Karin, I know. It's probably impossible. But I don't, is there a way to look at that? I mean, I know, like, for instance, next year's budget says 25 million in proprietary capital improvement projects, right? But that's 1 year, where other years it's been 2 million or 3 million or 7 million this year or something. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, you know, how often are, number one, how often are we going to have 300 new units in town? And Doug's got that because that's part of the projection. And then how much capacity does that require, I guess is what I'm getting at. And maybe that's impossible. And if it is, I'll accept it. But anyway, so that's one thought.
I think you're going to get a legal answer on that, not from James, but the it depends answer, because I think the reality of like when, where, what types of development is it going to be? I mean, there's so many factors that I think we can model it for sure, and use the assumptions like Karin said, but I'm not sure that it's going to be totally satisfying. And it's probably also because we're looking at these future oriented projects, and as she also said, they're all over the city, and so trying to think about the next project and the next project. It's not like we have 300 homes and we automatically start pulling the projects in related to that necessarily, right? There are obviously some things that have to happen, infrastructure and other things that seed that, get those projects off the ground. But I think it's going to be tough. We can try.
Okay. Well, I mean, the other thing is that's why I was pointing to Crestview Crossing, because I mean, I would guess I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I thought I saw that there have to be some improvements now to bring them online. Is that right? Do we know? I mean, well, not aside from the road, but other improvements.
They had to extend services through their development, and they did have to extend them south to get to south of side of 99 for their wastewater impacts. That was line costs, but that it wasn't necessarily any larger than what they had to do in jet.
Oh, okay. So there wasn't any off-site increase in pipe size or any of that stuff off-site anywhere?
Not much.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess then it really comes down back to, then the quick numbers, it's, what does 6 million buy us in terms of capacity? I mean, that's the other way to look at it, right? And say, what does that mean in terms of the annual number of projects in the CIP? Maybe it's as simple as that.
Well, Rick, this is Doug. I think part of that, if you take that $6 million, and as Karin indicated earlier, it goes into the pot. So we have the water, the wastewater, stormwater, and the transportation. So we have these master plans, and then we have our CIPs, which are the 5 years. So in this case, that $6 million per whatever that infrastructure is goes into that pot to do another project or upgrade someplace in the city, not at Crestview Crossing. So we're always looking, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years out, and trying to schedule, what upgrades, what system improvements need to be done to mitigate those impacts. And so it's not, we get $6 million this year means we're going to spend the $6 million next year. Sometimes we have to save up those funds over a period of time to have enough cash to be able to go out and do that project. So I'll use Crestview Drive as an example. There's SDCs and rates are involved in that, but we were also able to go out and get a grant from the state, $740,000 in order to move that project forward. That project might have had to wait. We'd have to look at the numbers because we didn't have enough in our revenue to be able to do that project in the time frame we're working on. It might have had been pushed out a couple of years. So there's all of those different, that's part of what Dan was getting to. There's all these different variables that come in to play it all at one time. So trying to just take $6 million and what is it? Well, each project's different.
Yeah, and I totally understand that. I get it, and I understand it's not, it's not a 1-for-1 match. But I guess what I'm also trying to say is we know what the projected population is supposed to be in 20 years, right? So we know that, or at least based on PSU. And so we know that's an increase of X percentage over this period of time, over 20 years. And so we know that there's Y number of projects that have to be in place in order to accommodate that. So all I'm really looking for is if we took a percentage, can you go back and say, all right, our total projected is $200 million, right? Does this 6 million, which is a growth rate of 3% of the population, does that correlate?
I
So
think
maybe
you
it's as
could,
easy as that. I mean, that sounds easy again, but, but I don't know. I'm just looking for something that I can hang my hat on to say, or our hats, proverbial collective hats, as to this is why, because this is the population projection. And maybe it's just as simple as that. That's not
well,
simple.
it's not that simple. But I mean, I think I actually understand where you're going with it now.
Okay.
A little bit, it could be thinking about the capital improvement project list, and certainly the SDCs don't fund that 100%, but thinking about, you know, that as a percentage possibly, and that might be a bit of a math problem, but, you know, thinking about then, you know, what is it, if we were to think about, you know, looking 5 years out, you know, 7 years out, maybe, I think we probably have a little bit more crystal ball, you know, staying close to the 5-year window than going 10 or more. Because we typically do the 5-year CIP, and you know, you could sort of look at that total number and say, okay, 6% is X percentage of that, but that's
Right.
also assuming that you're going to spend it immediately, which I think, to Doug's point, you don't always. You know, you sort of have to think about, you know, what's coming up, and so I mean, the best I could come up with maybe would be that, you know, and it's probably
Right.
as imprecise as you know, anything else we're talking about right now.
Right. But I mean, I think it at least gives us the other look, the other way, another way to look at it. But anyway. All
Yeah,
right.
no,
Bryce,
I
you got
agree.
a
Yep.
comment or question?
Yeah, last real quick, to your question, Con, around which SDCs, if I'm looking at slide 13 of your presentation, the transportation for a single family house is a little over 7,000. And then you noted the parks SDC is like 7,000 something. I'm guessing, is that number also for single family household? That's 7,000.
Yes.
Yeah. So with that in mind, I really can't reiterate enough, like a desire to have some sort of process in place where we're in conversation with parks. Because that right now, right, if we're identifying transportation as a significant sort of barrier for businesses, and that also is represented in SEC with the Parks and Rec, we have to be in conversation. And I don't know if, like, maybe we send Mike, I know you were involved in CPRD for a while, you could be our like liaison. But we have to have some sort of conversation, I think, with Parks and Rec if we're gonna actually hope to alleviate any of this problem.
All right, Mike.
Well, yeah, I mean, to that point, the CPRD is basically all on just new buildings. We don't look at any type of, you know, SEC on any type of remodel for anything. It's just all strictly brand new. But it was considerably less when I was on the board like 3.5 years ago. So I was a little bit surprised to see that number myself. But I agree with you. I think it would be a good idea, you know, for all of us to talk about it, because it affects everybody. You know, it just doesn't affect the city, it just doesn't affect the Parks and Rec. It affects all of us that live here. And so I think information is important.
All right. Anything else, folks? Karn, do you have enough to go on? Do you have too much to go on? Have we totally confused the whole thing?
Probably a little bit of both, but we'll start putting some things together and plan to come back. We'll talk internally to figure out, do we have some of those listening sessions or conversation with the community before we come back to the council, or do we come back to the council with some information and then go back out to the community? We'll kind of, you know, work through that a little bit on that process. But we'll continue down this path.
Awesome. All righty. Thank you. Anything else, folks? All right. I've got 6:59. So if we can come back at 7:10. So anyway, and Josh, my apologies. I see you just came on to the screen. Give us 10 minutes and we will be back and ready for you. All right. Thank you. All right, folks. mute and. All right, here we go. This is City Council business session for April 19, 2021. This meeting is now called to order. A roll call, please, Sue.
Counselor McBride,
Here.
Counselor Cofield, Counselor Granell Holloman.
Here.
Counselor Martinez Plancarte,
Here.
Mayor Rogers,
Here.
Counselor Bacon,
Here.
Counselor Finley,
Here.
and did Bryce come on? Because I had to. Not yet. Okay.
Okay. All right. So
You muted yourself early, Mr.
let me
Mayor.
try that again. The Pledge of Allegiance, please. All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right. Thank you all. All right, now presentation, item 4A on our agenda, the Shalen Valley Chamber of Commerce Quarter 3 Visitor Center Report. Mr. Josh Duder, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, City Councilors. I'm here to give a Visitor Center quarterly report for the third quarter. Sue, if you could change the slide, please. Thank you. This quarter, same as reflected the same amount in as the last 2 quarters, but we've been able to reduce our total expenses. That's due to the one-time expense of moving our location from outside of the downtown sector into the downtown sector. So that cost has been incurred and we can see lower costs going forward. So right now we're just spending on the cost of personnel and the lease, as well as utilities. Next slide, please. Thank you. The last presentation, I gave a lengthy explanation of all the different services that we provided, but at the presentation previous to that, a question came up about how we had tracked visitors in the past, and we've started a new system that's more reliable. Instead of just having an old school door counter, which certainly counts how many people come in and how many people go out, but an old school door counter can't differentiate between someone coming in for chamber business and somebody coming in for visitor center business. So what we've done is we've repurposed a formatted list here of that the chamber used to use for I think it was like a wine charm program that we were a part of, but it had all the right questions on it. So if someone was visiting the visitor center, we could ask them, where are they coming from? What brought them to our area? What other sources do they use to get information about Newberg and the surrounding area? Where are they staying? Those types of intake information that we can start to track. I didn't share the entire list and I've redacted the names just because this is on public record. But so we're starting to track their names and their emails just so that we can keep in contact with visitors. But we also are tracking walk-ins and phone calls as well. So all formats that people reach out to us, whether it's for, I just had somebody call from La Quinta, California, and they wanted some information about trails that they could hike, things to do aside from wineries to visit. So they're coming to visit their son, but they want to see what else can we do. So of course, the visitor center has that type of information. Now, certainly, we're not servicing as many people as we would like to in that capacity. But we have a plan on addressing that through social media, boosted social media, as well as I'm in the process of doing a wireframe and working on reformatting our homepage so that it's easier to navigate. It currently does already link out to the DMO's website, which is certainly useful for people that are planning electronically for their visits, and we certainly support that. But there are still an audience of people that really do like to have things in hand, including maps and brochures about the area, tasting cards and opinions about where to go for dinner when they get here. So we're catering to that group through that format. Next slide, please. I did want to note that the summer is coming, And so we are extending our hours of operation here at the visitor center. What that means is that the visitor center will continue to be open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. In addition to that, we'll be open Saturday and Sunday. So that's Memorial Day through Labor Day during the summer months. And so we plan on adjusting some of the in-house hours to accommodate the need there. But we may have to bring on an additional help as we've had in the past. And so our labor cost may increase to accommodate for an additional person to work 4 hours a week or 4 hours a day on Saturday and 4 hours on Sunday to make sure the visitor stays open. So that complete labor budget is still waiting approval with our board, but that should be presented perhaps at the next quarter on how we handled that situation. Lastly, we're partnering with local organizations to create self-guided tours. So these are COVID-safe tours. People will come here and grab a map that takes them through downtown, but the map basically guides them to points of interest, and the different paths will be laid out in a way that they don't intersect with. There'll be multiple paths so that they don't intersect too often, so that keeps groups apart from each other and sort of in safe pods, as it were. And we're partnering with the CPRD to provide park and trail information, the Cultural Center, Downtown Wineries Association, and the Newberg Area Historical Society will provide a list of historical points of interest. Last page. And I just wanted to point out that since we moved into our new location, approximately, well, I think it's almost a year at this point, but we've certainly been open for 9 months now. It's very spacious. It's got windows that can open. It's accommodating. We have visitors regularly, and we have seen an uptick in in-person visitors. Had a couple today, and they come in and they ask for the typical things, but the space is open and it's welcoming, and there is a public restroom available for visitors to the downtown area. That's what I have. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Let me turn that off. Any questions for Josh? All right. Not seeing, there we go, Stephanie.
I just have a quick question. With your list of partners for those maps, have you thought about partnering with Taste Newberg and the Newberg Downtown Coalition as well? Because I know they have lots of resources as well.
Absolutely. The organizations I listed were ones that had membership members that were already a part of that group. So with the DMO, they're not a membership organization. So even though they do represent the greater like Newberg area, there is a project that I will mention, but it's dependent upon a grant that I applied for. There's a better map that basically Leslie wrote a letter of recommendation for this grant that I wrote. And this map will basically include all of the organizations I listed, as well as the two you mentioned. I'm working with Polly as well on this, but it's going to be, if I get the grant, it'll be a bird's eye view perspective of the downtown area, from the Cultural Center down to Memorial Park, and then from River to, I believe, right about where the subway is on the west side. And it'll basically have that map that I talked about, but it'll be color coded. It'll completely list out wineries, tasting rooms, cafes, coffee shops, the camellias, whatever there is to visit. Because one of the biggest questions I get here at the visitor center, people walk in and they're here on a Wednesday afternoon. What is there to do? I'm here for a couple of days. And it's, unless they're really hardcore into wine tasting, sometimes the answer is, well, there's a really nice park over there. There's some really great restaurants downtown. There are things to do, but this creates a comprehensive list that partners with all of those organizations and promotes businesses. So I'm really hoping that I get the grant to pay for this, so that we don't have to lean on anybody's members to pay for it.
Elise.
So thanks for the presentation. So roughly 4 visitors per month for the quarter. Is that right? In person?
Yeah, actually less than, that's an average, but less than that in the darker months, but it's getting better.
But 4 per month for what, how much is your lease? 5,100 something, is that what I saw?
Right, that's the utilities and overhead, correct?
Yeah, I just feel like the customer acquisition cost for in-person, I mean, that's $1,200 a person, right?
Sure, I could certainly understand looking at it that way, but what we're offering is the service has been available. So had it been the other way around, which certainly it's not, but had it been a banner year, the services still would have been available for, the 1,000 people that could potentially come through the doors. And unfortunately, on top of it being a COVID year, and people are still not secure and going out. Some of the numbers that we've had in the past, and we went over this, in Q1, some of the numbers were not entirely accurate. That's why the way that I'm tracking the true people that are visiting the visitor center for visitor center purposes. My hope, Counselor, is that those numbers go up to a more reasonable tolerance, but I certainly understand your perspective on that.
Yeah, I guess just follow on, I would say, I mean, that in my perspective is something that I think as a council, we need to continue to talk about if that's the right model, because I really, really feel strongly that COVID is going to change the landscape of how things are done. And I do not see a visitor center in-person presence with only the chamber living at that visitor center, the correct use of TLT dollars.
Any other comments, folks? Yeah, I think I mean, I'm with Elise to a certain degree. I mean, honestly, and I think I've said this before, and stop me if I did, but I mean, I think next budget year, we're going to be down to like 30,000, I think is what we're projecting in the budget, if I'm right. Honestly, I'd rather see that not tied to TLT. I'd rather see it tied to economic development. But again, that's just my opinion, because then we're clearly supporting all businesses, not just the visitors walking in the door, but one guy's opinion. So there you go. All right. Anything else, folks, for Josh? All right. Josh, have a good evening. Thank you so much. Thank you for your work with the Historic Society as well. Keep in mind that stone house on Fulton. So,
Will do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, City Council.
we'll see you later. Thank you. All right. We are now on to item 5, the city manager's report.
Okay, I know that I probably should stretch this out for quite a while, but I won't. So I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID. As folks know, or I hope know, we've had an ongoing, or the mayor, I should say, has had an ongoing call with folks on every other Friday. And so just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about some of that. We had a good discussion around the Johnson & Johnson pause, some of the issues around vaccinations, and frankly, just how things are rolling out as far as vaccinations in the community. And reason I bring it up is the topic came up around vaccine hesitancy, and certainly I think folks are seeing the Johnson & Johnson pause and having some pause, and arguably I suppose that's understandable given the fact that the federal government has paused the use of that vaccine, and certainly it's changed the way that we've allocated vaccines in the county. We had that perspective from County Public Health. Just wanted to also point out, as we are going through this period of vaccinations and having, I think, I'll just speak for myself, having some hope around getting out there again and seeing people in person and having those opportunities. I'm grateful to hear that vaccinations are continuing, and that we're as a community and as community health providers to hear the numbers that Providence, Virginia Garcia, just ADEC pitching in and having vaccination clinics, drive-through options. The community is really coming together and trying to provide as much vaccination as folks are willing to take, I suppose, and getting the needle. Having gotten one of those shots, there certainly is some relief, I think, in that. I felt some personally. I will also say that I felt some side effects, and at the same level, I think the balance of those two things, the side effects were far less than the relief. And so I would encourage folks to get out there get educated as well if there are concerns about hesitancy. Virginia Garcia, the staff there mentioned that they are absolutely willing to do sort of the ask an expert for hesitant staff or hesitant community members, and certainly something to ask some questions if you have questions of the health provider. So just want to encourage folks in the community, if there are concerns or if there is hesitancy out there, to really seek some solid information. And I think generally looking at this from my perspective, at least, as a way to get us all back together, and I agree with the perspective that there'll be some changes in our lives that will not exactly bounce back to quote unquote the way things were, but just we'll need to adapt. And yet at the same point, I think we all value that human contact. So just want to say that for folks, and there are, as I said, there are resources out there for those who have questions. One of the things from a COVID perspective from the city, we continue to sort of watch the up and down of the county where the risk level is by the state's definition. And as we have the possibility of moving up, just considering what it may or may not do for our staffing resources and staffing levels at whether we keep things open. Right now, at least, we're not planning on changing things. We're actually looking at sort of continuing to reopen, provide some of those services. One of the things that we're interested in doing, had been for a while, Judge Blake had brought forward the idea of a community court. We're able to finally, due to COVID, we've not been able to move that project forward because we couldn't get folks in the room together. We were finally able to do that. And it looks like the community court, which will be a diversion type of court opportunity for community members, really matching them with resources in the community from nonprofits and other sources, that will get started May 25th, and that it would be monthly, more or less, the last Tuesday of every month. And that's just, it's exciting. I think, again, thinking about how we're coming out of something and able to provide what I hope will be a better experience for community members as we come out of that the sort of COVID darkness into an area where we can help each other and really help to match people with needed services. Another thing that last couple weeks worked on was something again near to some counselors on the call, equity task force. We discussed outreach to George Fox and really kind of planning for the next outreach, which will be the 28th, to sort of the BIPOC business community is the goal, and really trying to gather feedback. We had a less than ideal turnout from Fox, but I think due to the timing, we're trying to catch them before they left for the school year, and their students are really busy right now. But we got good feedback, and it's continuing to open the city up to community feedback that I think is really helpful. And so realizing some of the resources that are available on the Fox campus and how to access some of those in order to put messaging out there for city related things, and trying to think forward, I guess, into how in next year when students are back again, how we can really get some messaging out there to include students in community life more. And then I guess one of the next to last things on my list was the student commissioner push, and something that's on our website now. Another way to involve the next generation and kind of thinking about a social sustainability arc of really thinking about involving in the decision making those who will live the decisions longest of all of us, probably. How do we get high school and college age students involved in city activities and some of the boards and commissions that we have? So the recruitment period is posted on our website. It is posted in English and Spanish, and runs through June 1st. And so hopefully we will have some folks apply, be able to add a student to each of the standing commissions. And I think that'll be a really meaningful opportunity for those to be involved, those students to be involved. And also, frankly, I learn a lot from being around students, and I'm hoping that other participants on the boards and commissions will as well. Then lastly, one of the reasons we were trying to keep this agenda relatively light and maybe a little on the lighter side in terms of amount of content was we've got another night meeting tomorrow. And folks are invited to listen in on the first of our budget meetings or budget committee meetings. We'll have at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, and second year in a row for Zoom budget, but we'll do our best to wade through that and start with the general fund and sort of some of the internal services funds. And hopefully we'll get some good questions from budget committee members and help us improve our budgeting process. So, I think that's the high points, and we'll post the details. There's some really cool pictures of some of the projects that Public Works has been up to, some construction and things like that. But since I can't verbally share those with you, I'll post them on the website, and hopefully folks enjoy that. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
All right, questions, folks?
Around vaccine hesitancy, we've been doing a lot of Virginia Garcia, Unidos, the county, and Providence, and we have a Latinx event at Dayton High School on Friday, which will probably be around 350. And I think we've done about just around 1,000 Latinx outreach vaccinated individuals, Dayton West or East. Yeah, but it's definitely, I've had the opportunity to do 4 BIPOC clinics in Portland last week and 8 this week. And it's just a good reminder to go to the people and not expect them to come to you. So I've been slapped in the face last week, just as a reminder. And I think it's applies to us in city council too, for sure.
Lincoln, would you like to enter that to the record? Yes. All right. All right, council committee reports. Anybody got anything to report out? All right. Well, I'll say it. I think I sent you guys this by email, but I'll say it here again. If you have not had a chance to see the mayor's prayer breakfast, the comments from our very own Jules and Bryce, check it out. Check it out on the mayor's prayer breakfast Facebook page. They did a killer job, both of them. And some of it was tough, some of it was courageous, but they were great. And so thank you guys for sharing that and your time for doing that. That was cool. So, and speaking of it, it was in person. There were 50 or 60 people at the cultural center, something like that, sitting 4 to a table. So it was good. So thank you again, Bryce and Jules, for that. Mentioning, let's see, what else? You mentioned VG, and these are, as we all know, there's been this flurry of activity for earmarks, appropriations, would-be transit bills, all this kind of stuff flying around, Ways and Means testimony left and right. But anyway, I know some of the things that we supported or letters went out for included the bypass, particularly the 219 interchange with Wilsonville Road and the bypass itself. An expansion of the VG clinic here in Newberg, trying to roughly double their size. The CPD trail from Newberg to Dundee, extension of the trail, and the Shalen Cultural Center's performance wing. So fingers crossed, we get all of those. The chances we get all of those, well, we'll have to see. But anyway, so there's good stuff out there, and hopefully some of this will be able to get completed. Anybody else have anything else? All right. With that, I think it is now time. We will move into, all right. So this is now, I'm going to read the script to announce the start of an executive session. As to remind everyone, the executive session comes now, and then at 8:30, we will be back for the urban renewal discussion again at 8:30. All right, so I will now read the announcement required to hold an executive session. After the announcement, the Zoom meeting will terminate and the council will enter a separate Zoom meeting not open to the public. The city council will now meet in executive session for the purpose of deliberation with persons designated by the governing body to conduct a performance evaluation of a public official pursuant to ORS 192-662, performance of a public official. Representatives of the news media and designated staff and other persons will be allowed to attend the executive session. No decision will be made in this executive session. At the end of the executive session, the council meeting will adjourn and we will not return to open session. We will now terminate this Zoom meeting and begin the executive session. All right, folks, so log out and then log back in on your other invite. And then Dan, we'll see you at 8:30.
Question, Sue, is this the one for Dan? This is the one for Dan, not the one for the urban renewal?
Yes.
Okay,
Urban
That's
renewal
later.
at 8:30.
So Kezia will be your staff.
Gotcha. All
Yeah.
right.
All right.
And I are gonna chill for an hour.
Nice. Have fun without us, but not too much fun. You know, I like to have fun.
All right. Let's do it.